All the people online thought they were going to get away without hearing me. So. All right, I'm gonna change gears here real quick because I want you to transition with me to something different. I'm going to ask a question that seems out of nowhere. How many of you have ever been to Raising Cane's restaurant? All right, yeah. That's like the new hot restaurant with my kids. They love Raising Cane's for some reason. If you've not been there, let me explain what Raising Cane's is. You can go to Raising Cane's and you can get chicken fingers and French fries and coleslaw, and that's it. Thank you, Miss Becky. There are options. You can have your chicken fingers on bread and call it a sandwich, or you can have your chicken fingers next to bread and call it a platter. But all you're getting is chicken fingers and fries. That's it. But here's what's crazy. You know what makes, and I'll be honest with you, this is my opinion, and so if you're a Cane's aficionado, please don't shoot the messenger. The fingers aren't that good. But they have this little tub they give you with the chicken fingers full of this orange goo that's called Cane's sauce. And it's the secret sauce, and that stuff is good on everything. And if they were to bottle that and sell that alone, they may never sell chicken fingers again. But they'd be rich selling the secret sauce. Okay? And what's interesting, have you ever noticed how many fast food restaurants have a secret sauce of some sort? Let me do an age test for some of you. I'm going to say a part of a sentence and see how many of you can finish it. 2 all beef. Thank you all Gen Xers for identifying yourself for me. Okay? But think about it. Here's the crazy thing. Have you ever thought about how silly the sauces are? Because, McDonald's made their whole name on 2 off-beef patties, special sauce. You know what the special sauce is? It's Thousand Island dressing. And I'm going to tell you something else. This might ruin your day. I looked up Cane's sauce. All it is ketchup, mayonnaise, and Worcestershire sauce. That sauce. Okay? That's all it is, mixed together with some garlic and some pepper. That's all it is. And here's the crazy thing. Why do I say that? Because sometimes it's the simplest things that make the biggest difference. Because the Big Mac wouldn't be a Big Mac without that little bit of Thousand Island dressing. Cane's wouldn't be open without that mayonnaise mixed with ketchup. But when you put them together, these really simple things make something better and wonderful. And why am I saying all this? Because I want to explain this to you. We're celebrating today these 50 years of marriage. 50 years of marriage with no attempted homicide convictions. That's amazing. But here, what is the secret sauce that makes marriage possible? And what's really frustrating, sometimes when you find the secret, sometimes you can be so frustrated because the secret is so simple. But you know what the secret sauce is? For marriage, not just marriage, the secret sauce for relationship, the secret sauce for every relationship is very simple. It's the secret sauce of love. And we're going to look at today, we're going to look at 1 Corinthians chapter 13, where Paul is going to lay out this idea of love and what love looks like and how this secret sauce makes everything else work. But in order to go there, first I want to give you just a real quick background. I think it's important that we understand that as we're talking about love, we're going to talk about the fact that what our world often means by love and what the Lord means by love are often different things. But also what I want you to see is this. While we celebrate romantic love and marital relationships today, I want you to understand the same love that empowers those empowers every relationship that we interact in. If we live with this love, it not only revolutionizes our marriages, it revolutionizes our work relationships, it revolutionizes relationships within the church. And as a matter of fact, as Paul is writing about this love, he's not talking about romantic issues. He's talking about the fact that there's this church in a city called Corinth that is super gifted. He says, you guys have more gifts than anybody else. Not only are they gifted, they're super wealthy. They're able to give gifts to other churches. But inside this church, there's dysfunction. As a matter of fact, I would suggest this. I used to say the Corinthians are the crazy cousins of the family of God. But I would suggest this. No one ever gave Paul more heartache than the people of Corinth. No one ever upset him and frustrated him. As a matter of fact, as you read through 1st and 2nd Corinthians, you hear this anguish of a father who's concerned about his children. But what's going on here is they have all these gifts. They're doing all these amazing things. They're speaking in tongues. They're doing miracles. They're doing prophecies. But inside, they're fighting constantly. And Paul gives them a diagnosis. And as a matter of fact, in the previous chapter, he gives them a rebuke. He says to them, some of you are about to get in a lot of trouble. You're about to be judged by God because you keep coming to the Lord's table and you're taking it in an unworthy manner, and you're about to be judged and you're going to be rebuked. And some of you have already died because of this. And then he also says, by the way, you guys got to understand you need each other. And he gives them this beautiful picture of the body of Christ where he says, we're all connected. We need each other. All this is leading up to 1 Corinthians 13 where he gives them their big diagnosis. He says, you know what? You know why you guys have all this trouble? You know why you have all these problems? It's because you don't have love. Look at 1 Corinthians chapter 13 with me. And we're going to just run through this passage. I told Pastor Clark I've got a 45-minute message that I'm trying to get done in 15. So stay with me. Beginning in chapter 13, verse 1, Paul's talking to the Corinthians, and he wants them to understand something, that their greatest priority should be love for one another. He says, if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I'm a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I'm nothing. If I give away all that I have, and if I deliver my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Now, you have to understand what's going on here in this church in Corinth is they're having arguments about the gifts, and they're saying, my gift is better than yours, I'm more important than you, and they're having this back and forth, and Paul says this, first thing I want you to understand, it doesn't matter how gifted you are, how many gifts God has given you, if you don't love one another, it doesn't matter. Now, that's kind of hard to get our heads around sometimes. He says, if you speak in tongues of men and angels, but you don't have love, it's just like a noisy gong banging. I don't know about you guys. A noisy gong is just annoying. A noisy gong is not really doing anything worthwhile. But you know what's a problem? Often we say, what's most important is how I serve God and how I use my giftedness. And Paul says, no. How you use the gift that God gave you is not near as important as how you love those God has placed around you. Your ministry for God is wasted if it's not done in the love of God. It says, if I have all prophetic powers, if I can see the future, if I can bring down to you the very words of God, and I can uncover mysteries, and I can give you all the knowledge, and I have this faith where if I say to the mountain, go throw yourself in the ocean, it does it. Can you imagine this? These are miraculous acts. And what Paul's saying is this, I don't care if you do miracles. I don't care if you can make mountains disappear. It doesn't matter if you don't have love. By the way, all Paul is saying is what Jesus has already said. In Matthew 25, we have the parable of the sheep and the goats that talks about Jesus dividing the people. And he says to them, you know what? They come to him and say, didn't we do miracles in your name? Didn't we cast out demons in your name? And you remember what Jesus said? He says, depart from me, I never knew you. Why? Because you didn't visit me when I was in prison. You didn't feed me when I was hungry. In other words, you did not act in love. And so you know what? All that stuff you did in my name, it doesn't matter because it wasn't empowered in my love. This one really shakes me at the end here. It says, if I give away all I have and I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. This is the ultimate sacrifice. What Paul is saying is, listen, I saw one pastor one time said, he said, the wallet is the last frontier of Christians. It's kind of like Star Trek. The wallet is the final frontier. Because if you can get a Christian to separate themselves from their money, you've really done something. But what Paul says is, I don't care if you empty your bank account. I don't care if you take every penny and you give it to someone who's poor. I don't care if you didn't do it in love. It doesn't matter. But even worse than that says, listen, if I deliver up my body to be burned, you understand, in the context Paul is speaking, persecution is real. And there are people who are dying for their faith, and we would look at people who die for their faith and say, that person is a hero of the faith. And Paul says, if you didn't do it because of love, it doesn't matter. And now, I want you to understand this. What Paul is really saying is, when you do these things without love, there is nothing added to your account with God. God looks at you and says, you know what? Great. You preached a great message, Jack. That doesn't impress me much because you didn't do it with love. Listen, you gave all your money to these poor people. That doesn't impress me much because it wasn't out of a heart of love. You're doing all these miracles. It doesn't matter. And here's the thing we need to understand. We don't like this. We don't get this because we want to elevate the gifts and we want to elevate what we're doing in our actions. But God says this, if you don't operate in his economy of love, nothing else matters. So when Paul is talking to the Corinthians who are arguing about all these other things, he says, you know what? You have the cart before the horse. You're getting it all backwards because if love's not there, nothing else matters. Now I'm going to jump down to the end of the passage here, and then we're going to come back again. He not only says to him, listen, love is the priority, but then he says that love is important because, beginning in verse 8, says, love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it'll pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part, but when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. Here's the crazy thing. The people in Corinth are arguing. They're saying, hey, I'm doing all these things, all these works for God, but I'm not doing them in love. But, surely these things matter. These things are important. And what Paul says is this. I want you to understand, any ministry you're doing for Christ is going to come to an end. He says, prophecies are going to pass away. As for tongues, they're going to pass away. And listen, we use this passage a lot to talk about cessation of sign gifts and all this other stuff. But I want you to see what Paul is really talking about here. He's saying, listen, of all the things you get to do in the name of Christ, the only thing you get to do in the name of Christ you're going to get to do for all of eternity is love. One day we're all going to close our eyes and we're going to wake up in heaven and we will no longer have ministries to do. We'll no longer be exercising our spiritual gifts. We'll be serving in God's kingdom, but it'll be a different economy. But what's going to happen is throughout all eternity, we're still going to have this responsibility to love. So he says, listen, if you get to choose between something that's temporary and isn't going to go with you versus something that's permanent that's going to be for eternity, which one do you think is the better investment? Remember, love is our priority because love is permanent. Love never ends, and our command to love never ends. So I want you to see a couple things here. First, real quick, before we transition to this, I want you to understand, love is a priority because nothing else matters without it. And love is a priority because love is permanent and everything else is passing. But here's the last thing. I told you, I'm trying to get 45 minutes into 15. But here's the thing. Paul then says, let me explain to you what love is. Have you ever noticed how confused people are about love? The saddest confusion about love I ever heard. I remember years ago, O.J. Simpson gave an interview. And he said, I didn't kill my wife. And, I don't want to rehash that. What he said after that, though, was, but if I did kill her, it would only be because I loved her so much. No commentary. Just think about how sad and diluted that idea of love is. But if you think about it, if we look around, people have this weird idea of love everywhere. If you ask two people their definition of love, you'll get three definitions. Because everybody's confused. And what do we usually define love as? We usually define it as an emotion or a feeling. I've told you before, I've heard it defined very close to the flu. It's this weird, squishy feeling I get in the pit of my stomach. I guess if you vomit, you have the flu. If you don't vomit, you're in love. But here's the thing. Paul realizes that as humans, we have this very warped idea of love. So you know what he does? He gives us a definition of love. And I want you to look at this definition because what he does is he shows us the character of what love really looks like. Beginning in verse 4, it says, love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It's not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It's not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. Now, I'm hoping you're seeing something here. You know what's absent from Paul's definition of love and his description of love? Is any comment on feeling. He never says love feels this way or love is emotion that goes this way. You know what instead he does? He shows us what the character of love is, because I want you to understand something. Love is not about how you feel. I'm not going to ask the people who've been here married 50 years because I don't want to get anybody in trouble. But I'll tell you, as someone who's been married 25 years, sometimes the feeling of love's not there, right? Mainly because I'm just a sinful creature. But I want you to understand, it's not about the feeling, it's about the action. What you see here with Paul is he gives us a definition of love that is bound up in the way that we approach one another and the way that we treat one another. Love's not about feelings, love's about attitudes and actions towards one another. Now, I'm going to briefly walk through these, and I'm going to tell you right now, we're not going to do a deep dive because each of these could be a sermon in and of itself. But I want you to notice what Paul says about the character of love, and then I want you to understand what he's doing here is he's giving us a diagnosis and he's giving a test to us to help us define how well we're living out biblical love. First thing he says is love is patient and kind. Also, what I think is interesting is a lot of these characteristics, there are 15 characteristics, but they actually fold together. And some of them are actually in tandem. And I believe this first one's in tandem. And the idea here is love is both patient and kind. You know what it means when Paul says love is patient? It means that when you are provoked, you don't retaliate. And you don't respond. Those of you who are married, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands because I don't have time on my counseling docket. But just think, have you ever been provoked in marriage? Let me say this, step back a step further. Have you ever been in a relationship where you've been provoked by someone who maybe isn't your spouse? What it means when it says love is patient is this: when someone provokes you, you don't rise to the bait. And you don't respond back to it. Instead, someone who's patient says, you know what? You did that, but I'm not going to respond in the same way that you've acted. And he follows it up with love is patient, and the tandem here is love is patient and kind. Origen, one of the church fathers, said that this word here is an idea that kindness is the love that is sweet to everyone. And what it means is this: when someone comes at you and they provoke you, rather than responding in the same manner, the kind person says, instead, I'm going to be sweet to you. I'm going to respond in kindness to you. How many marriages could have been saved if when a provocation happened, rather than rising to the bait, the other person said, I'm going to respond in kindness? How many relationships, how many jobs, how many whatever could have been saved just by saying, I'm going to behave in love, I'm going to be patient, and I'm going to reply in kindness rather than like attitude. Love does not envy or boast. Here's this idea, what's going on here is this. When we are operating in love, we're not jealous of one another. We're not envious of one another. We're not looking at the gifts the other person has and say, man, it's just not fair, I didn't get that. You know, it's an unhealthy marriage that if your spouse is getting positive attention, it upsets you, right? But here's the idea. The idea is this. Love says, when you rejoice, I rejoice. When you weep, I weep. I'm not envying you. I'm not boasting in my own accomplishments. It's not a competition. In marriage, there can't be a competition between husband and wife. In the church, there can't be competition between those who love Jesus and want to serve him. Instead, we have to say, we're not going to envy, and we're not going to boast. We're not going to elevate ourselves over one another. But love does not envy or boast. It's not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. The idea of arrogance here is this idea of, I put myself on a pedestal above you. I look down on you. I think for some reason I'm better than you. And by the way, this really resonates with the Corinthians who are arguing over their giftedness. And Paul says, if you love one another, you're not going to be arrogant towards one another. You're not going to think less of each other. He says, you're not going to be rude. You're not going to treat each other. The word here actually says, you're not going to treat them in an unseemly manner. And actually, there's a moral connotation here. But it says, if you love someone, you're not arrogant towards them. You don't mistreat them. You don't use them. Love doesn't insist on its own way. All these three, I think, go together because if you think about it, an arrogant person treats someone in an unseemly manner and then they use that person to get their own ends. But when we live in love, we say, you know what? I'm not going to put myself above you. I'm going to treat you with kindness and with grace, and I'm not going to try to win every argument. I'm not going to try to use you to satisfy my needs. Instead, I'm going to have the same mind that Christ had, who surrendered everything in order to save me. Love's not irritable or resentful. There's a joke I read years ago. Wife said, sometimes I wake up grumpy. Other days I let him sleep in. But here's, if you are constantly on edge and you're constantly irritable, you're not behaving in love, because what you're doing is you're actually expecting the other person to make you happy. See, if you live in love, you're not going to live an angry, irritable life. And the tandem that goes with it here is why. It says it's not irritable or resentful. You know why people are usually grumpy? Because they're being historical. Do you know what I mean by that? They're keeping a record of wrongs in their mind. And they're grumpy because as soon as their spouse or someone else does something that frustrates them, they immediately recount every other time they've ever done it. Because they're keeping a record of wrongs, and that's made them resentful. If we live in love, what we do is we say, you know what? I'm going to let go of those things. Yes, hey, you know what? Here's the deal. Every relationship of any level, there's something in your history where somebody's offended you, right? But the key to living in love is when those things happen, you forgive them and you forget them. Now, I know some of you are saying, well, I can't forget them. I understand that. When we say forget, when we say forgive, what we really mean is this. I remember it, but I choose to never use it against you again. Love's not irritable because love's not keeping score. Love does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with truth. Here's what I think Paul's getting at here. You ever been around people and they're just so happy when the other person messes up? You ever been around people and they're keeping score so tight that when the other person messes up, they're thrilled? Because now I've got something to hold over them. Or my suspicions have finally been confirmed. And here's what Paul's saying. Listen, when you live in love, you are not excited when the person you're in a relationship with fails. You're not excited when your suspicions are confirmed. Instead, you're excited when they're not confirmed. You don't rejoice in wrongdoing. You don't rejoice when they mess up. Instead, you rejoice in the truth. And you're excited when you see this person doing what's right and following after Christ. Love doesn't rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Now, I want you to notice something here. Paul started with, love is patient and kind. And then he goes through several things that tell us what love is not. He goes positive and then negative. And by the way, sometimes when you're trying to define something, the best way to define it is to figure out what it's not, right? But then he ends up with this group here. He says, love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. Really quickly, Paul says love bears all things. Actually, the word there could be translated love covers all things. And it's this idea, the same thing is seen in 1 Peter 4. It says love covers a multitude of sin. When you behave in love towards someone, what you say is, you know what, they're not perfect, but I'm not going to dwell on that. They messed up, but I'm not going to hold that against them. Yes, I have reason to be frustrated, but I'm going to cover that over. And I'm not going to look at that. I'm going to move on because it's not that big a deal. It's amazing to me how many marital fights actually start over things that are not very big deals, but people refuse to cover them. Love bears all things. Love believes all things. The idea here is this: when we're behaving in love, we are always looking to believe the best about the other person. Philippians, we're told to, whatever is true, whatever is just, to think about those things. Do you realize that Paul's writing that passage in the context of an argument between two people? And he's saying, when you think of them, don't think about the thing they did wrong. Think about the good things about them. And that's the key to peace. Love hopes all things. Love never gives up hope. That things are going to be better. That God's going to be glorified. That we're going to grow closer. Love never gives up, which is the final thing. Love endures all things. When we are behaving in love, because again, love's not my feelings, love's my actions. Love's my attitude. So I always have the choice when I'm in a love relationship to say, you know what? I'm not giving up. I'm not quitting. I'm enduring this because that is what Christ would have me do. And by the way, it's what Christ has done for each and every one of us. So, let me just give you a couple things to think about real quick. And then we're going to have a group of people come in and talk about how they've lived this out. What do we need to do? We need to evaluate our love. I should be evaluate your love. Evaluate you love isn't right. That's bad English. So forgive my typing. But evaluate your love. Here's the deal. We need to understand that what you hear on the radio, what you hear from your friends next door, what you hear from people or see in movies, that's not love. What is love? 1 Corinthians 13. Living out the actions and the attitudes of love. And we need to evaluate our love against that, because what most people will say is, I'm a very loving person. I have these strong feelings, these passionate feelings for this person. Yes, but are you following them up with the actions and attitudes of love that Christ has given us? Secondly, is remember the priority of love. Nothing in our lives is more important than how we love God and love one another. And so don't say, hey, well, I'm not acting in love, but I'm going to do all these other things. I'm going to meet all these other needs. No, that's not enough. Without love, nothing else matters. And then finally, we have to make a choice to act in love towards one another. And we have to say, you know what? No matter how I feel, no matter where I'm going, no matter what's going on in my life today, I'm going to behave in a loving way. We need to stop thinking about being in love and start thinking about living love day by day. And that's entirely within our hands, and it's entirely our responsibility to do. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for the